Well, welcome everyone. This is the Dare to Be Great, Dare to Be You podcast. I'm your host, Sean Langwell, and we've got a very special guest with us today, Ralph Scott, the co-founder and producer, engineer, et al. Voice narrator from Squeaky Cheese Productions with us. I'll let him introduce himself for a brief moment after I do the introduction of the show. This show is really about, for those of you who like honest, vulnerable, and real stories about what it takes not only to become great, but more self-confident and bold enough to be yourself. If that sounds like you, then this show is for you. Join me each week for inspiring, encouraging, and meaningful conversations with diverse people from all walks of life and industry. Leaders and brave individuals who offer unique insights into the fields of arts, entertainment, business, finance, technology, healthcare, sports, psychology, recovery, self-improvement, personal growth, and so much more. Each of my guests are ordinary people just like you and me, with one possible difference. They were bold enough to take a chance on themselves. As a result, they have accomplished extraordinary things in their lives to be considered great, masters, or experts at what they have been called to do. Most importantly, they are true to themselves and epitomize the title of this podcast, Dare to Be Great, Dare to Be You. In each episode, you will learn valuable secrets and insights to help you believe that you too are worthy of so much more. Ralph, welcome.
Sean, thank you for this. I mean, I very much appreciate the opportunity. It's also a thrill to be back in your digital space again. The last time I saw you, you were locked inside of the cloistered cell of a Studio Bricks recording booth, and found the experience hopefully rewarding. I think you did. You certainly produced an absolutely beautiful audiobook out of it. You showed yourself to be a natural, if you will. And I'm hoping that you do more of them down the road, either in the nonfiction space and or fiction space. You had asked a little bit about who I am. I'm an audiobook producer and narrator of the last 6 years. I've been actually in audio since the age of sitting down, 5. When I first took a cassette recorder, not even a micro cassette recorder, what was considered a portable cassette recorder, where you loaded this plastic thing with little wheels on it called a cassette. And I teamed up with the kid up the block on Malvern, Long Island, Louis Marinaro. And we wanted to create, we had written this little radio script. And I don't even remember what the plot was, but I do remember one scene. And it's all these years later, decades later, it carries with me. And that speaks to the strength of audio, the power of audio. We wanted to create a scene of 2 guys walking through a sewer. So we took a dish pan with about ½ an inch of water in it, a white dish pan, a plastic, like Rubbermaid dish pan. And we placed it in the front or into the barrel of a front-loading dryer, clothes dryer. And then we took the portable cassette recorder, hit record and play, placed it in there as well, and then took our hands and splashed the water. The echo created by this very simple, acoustically significant space sounded just like 2 people walking through a sewer pipe.
Oh, that's
so I think from that moment on, I was sold on audio. And over the years, I haven't always worked in audio. Sometimes I worked in Hollywood PR. At one point, I was a product developer and inventor. For about 2 decades, I was a developmental book editor. But audio has always been something that I've returned to because of that first love. And the interesting thing about that first love is that you never stop loving it. There's always another project that compels you to discover, oh, wow, this is a really neat opportunity. This is a really cool story. This is a great opportunity to create a character you've never created before. So I think that although that's primarily on the fiction side, nonfiction, it applies as well, because in our industry, we consider a nonfiction narrator as, in fact, a character.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit on me.
Well, I appreciate that. And it is interesting because having the experience of spending 4 to 5, maybe a little bit more months with you and your director, Kendra, I was a fish out of water, and here I am writing a book or narrating a book that's called 10 Seconds of Boldness. And I was out of my comfort zone to nth degree, but there's a certain amount of passion that I hear you talk about just with that story. And I'm glad you open with it, and it's that the foreshadowing of Foley before you even knew what Foley was. And that is really, really cool. And that's the beauty of narration, whether it's for, just audiobooks or film in general. Things and stories tend to stick with us when we add those metaphorical instances and add color and dialogue and intonation and all these things. So we got a few questions we're gonna talk about, but I want you to jump in right now since I'm thinking about it. Talk about the nuances of voice and portrayal of character in setting, because there is not always a lot of narration that's done. I mean, you have to narrate the book in a fiction sense, but how do you bring in the elements of space and environment in addition to the character inflections to create this dynamic, living, breathing product that is called an audiobook?
It's a great question. I think that the first thing we need to parse out is, let's answer the question first from a fiction standpoint, because
Okay.
there are certainly many more characters in a novel than there may be in a nonfiction book. Although we have certainly done nonfiction books in which we have to portray various individuals, such as pharmaceutical executives, across 20 of them in a nonfiction book. But let's look at it first from a fiction standpoint. Setting is imperative. Tone is imperative. Knowing your character is imperative, but knowing how your character relates within a setting is imperative. So, for example, just like you would expect while reading a novel, if a character is standing in front of an auditorium of 300 people, that character is going to obviously have a very different take on his or her environment than when that character exits the auditorium and walks down a blind alley at night and hears weird noises around him or her. There's going to be a natural tendency to be afraid of that environment, or try to have a certain bravado to overcome that fear.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in most audiobooks, although it's starting to change, we don't have sound effects. So we now have to convey that that person giving the lecture to 300 people in a lecture hall, we have to convey what that's like, and the natural influence that individual would want to imbue in his or her delivery to the masses. And then suddenly we have to switch to conveying a certain trepidation and attempt to overcome. Only we have to do it with the text in front of us and the intonation, the pacing. Some of that can be adjusted in post, but you really want to do it at the mic. So I would say that setting is imperative to understand prior to recording that scene. In fact, it's really imperative that you put in the time in pre-production on any audiobook project before you ever hit the microphone. You got to know every chapter almost cold, not to the point of memorization, but you have to have a sense going in. And we frequently make notes in the margins of the text that we are going to be performing. And notice that I said performing, not reading. We do not read in our business, we perform. So I'd say that on the fiction side, it is certainly imperative. On the nonfiction side, perhaps less so, but there needs to be a consistency on the nonfiction side, because your audience is going to be staying with you across the entire narrative of what might be a 200, 300, 400, I think in your case, a 400-page nonfiction work of art. Well, consistency is imperative. And trying to maintain consistency so that you're not drawing attention to yourself as the narrator, but you're drawing attention to the messages that the writer, the indie writer, is hoping to convey. That's a lot of work. I will not kid you. It's a lot of work. And I would say, if you want to know how that's done, pull up a couch and stay about 5 years.
Yeah, and it is. And I didn't understand any of those dynamics, but going back to the fiction example, for instance, you don't have the benefit of film or visual to convey what that looks like from multiple perspectives, the point of view. The person standing on the stage, whether they're fumbling for their words, whether they're hungover, whatever those internal dynamics are that brought them to the stage in the first place and the purpose of the speech. But the challenge of doing that is also, how do you convey? You can't show the size and scope of the audience, so you have to somehow be able to do that. Not only, and this is talking to my author friends out there too. What I learned from this process is you have to have some of these concrete details built into the actual manuscript to convey this if you are planning on doing an audiobook, because if you don't, there's going to be a gap. So what I'm talking about is, you've got a point of view from the person being on the stage. He is the speaker, she is the speaker, trying to communicate some message. But how are you going to incorporate the audience reactions without sighs or gaffs or whatever it is, or throwing somebody dropped a glass in the back of the room that causes all that? Those are simple cues, right, Ralph, that you can do to create scope and depth of the size of the room, because it could be a distant clanking of the door that's going back to the main ballroom kitchen. I mean, there's tons of
Mhm.
different things you can do. So
Yes.
um, it's important to, the reason I want you to have you on this show is because there are so many nuances. It's not just writing a book and reading, as you said. This is performing. This is an
Well,
art of performance.
I appreciate your acknowledgement of that. I would say that you're right. You do need to, as an author who is planning on doing an audiobook, um, unless your book is already dropped, is already published up on Audible or Barnes and Noble, or you want to, if you're still in the 11th hour of the writing stages, and we're seeing this phenomenon happen. It's been going on for about, wow, 4 or 5 years when I first heard about it at the Audio Publishers Association at the Javits Center in New York. Um, you want to pay heed to your setting, which you want to do anyway, even before audiobooks ever existed. But you want to pay heed to your setting. And if you have the opportunity, you want to write the narrative so that it does, in fact, convey that you are not in a room of 20 people, but a room of 300 or stadium of 80,000.
Right.
And those verbal cues, not nonverbal, those verbal cues are imperative to set the stage. Now, there are ways in the dialogue to do that as well. So, for example, if the speaker is up there at a lectern and talking to the masses, it would not be unusual in the dialogue for the speaker to say, wow, when I woke up this morning, I didn't expect to be confronting 80,000 people. So there are ways in the dialogue to convey that as well. Now, the question then becomes, well, if it's not in there, what can a narrator do
Right.
to still fill that space, if you will, no pun intended?
And
And I think there are ways.
I'm glad you're
Say
touching
again?
on that, because it is like, I made the assumption that you're still in the work in progress, but you're also going to be narrating books that are already published and they want to do that. So you have to find there's a different level of how
Hmm.
you communicate that with the work that you do. So
That is correct.
yeah,
Yeah, I think that those can be more difficult examples, which is why we are very selective about the material that we record, because some material really needs to go back through the editorial process before it gets to a narrator. You don't want to be paying your narrator to be making changes on the spot to your text. It happens, though. It does happen, and you try to be flexible with that. But um, you know, we are seeing over the last 5, 6 years, we are seeing A-list authors who are writing now their next novel with audiobooks in mind. So you're seeing, for example, less and less attributives. He said, she said. If you've got a dialogue between two people and those narrators or that narrator is doing her job well or his job well, you should already know by the way they are interpreting those characters who's speaking. Now, that's in a solo narration. In a duet narration, it's a little easier because you're hearing the female speaking to the male speaking to the female. So you shouldn't need to say, have that third omniscient narrator say, he said,
right.
she said, because you're hearing. Where it becomes more important, of course, is when you've got more than two people, 3, 4, 5, 8. And there too, you're going to have narrative cues if the author has already set out. But this goes back to well before audiobooks, right? You need to know in a dialogue involving more than 2 or 3 people, you need to know, you need to let your readers know who's speaking.
Right.
And there are a variety of ways of doing that other than saying he said, she said, they spoke, they jumped, whatever.
Right. Yeah, and that's I'm glad that we're having this part of the conversation, because I'm going to throw myself under the bus. I didn't understand this, and I'm writing a book about how to progress, not perfection, and getting out of your comfort zone, and things of the nature of not being a perfectionist. Well, guess what? I'm reading through and trying to act out my own words. And it's bringing me back to the impetus of when I wrote those words. And then my mind starts drifting and I'm going too fast or too slow or second guessing or finding a typo. So, after the third session, for those that have never done this before, Ralph and his director said, you know what? They asked me a real blunt question and said, have you practiced this? And a big part of my book is all about repetition and practice and rehearsal. Well, little wake up call for Mr. Author of 10 Seconds of Boldness. I hadn't. I thought I was above it. I've defaulted back to what I thought I'd done all my life, which is I got this. I don't need to do it. I can figure it out on the fly. I got news for you folks out there. Pay heed to whoever ends up doing your audiobook and rehearse this. If you're going to be narrating your own stuff, you better rehearse it. Otherwise,
Well,
you're going
yeah.
to wipe egg off your face.
I would say that, and thank you for the moment of contrition. At the same time, to your credit, you did by virtue of jumping into the recording environment, you were actually embracing one of the pivotal ideas in 10 Seconds of Boldness. That sort of, if it hadn't been called 10 Seconds of Boldness, it would have been some variation on Carpe Diem or Carpe Diem. So I think you did that. To your credit, I think just by virtue of getting out of your comfort zone and throwing yourself into an environment which is somewhat restrictive when you first get into it. I mean, you're in a very tiny space, right, with a closed door that looks like you're being hermetically sealed for life. And if you have a nice enough booth, hopefully there's an air exchange device in there so you don't suffocate. But the fact that you did that speaks very well to your understanding of your own material. Now, in terms of the nuance, yes, it is imperative. And this goes for narrators as much as professional narrators, as much as it goes for indie authors who decide to narrate their own material. It is imperative that you know your material. That doesn't mean you have to memorize every chapter before you show up at that next recording session. But if the producer is doing his or her job and the director is doing his or her job, they should have already let the client know, a client who's going to be narrating his or her own material. They should already let them know that, okay, we believe we're going to accomplish 40 pages today or 60 pages today. And that represents chapters 2 through 7 or 2 through 4. So please at least read those before you show up. We're not expecting you to now read and know cold chapter 13 or 18. So yeah, it's important that you know your material. It is also almost inevitable that when you, as a first-time narrator, who up till that point has been an indie author, when you start to narrate your material, there is a phenomenon that happens. It's both unconscious and conscious, or very soon the unconscious becomes conscious. And that's, oh, I'm now hearing my words for the first time. Up till now, I've been writing them, I've been editing them, and that's usually a very silent process unless you're working with a writing colleague in a writing group, or unless you're working with a writing colleague who is an editor. But even then, it tends to be a silent process that happens over the transom between emails. Right. Well, now you're bringing those words to life for the ear, or as the folks at Audible say, making a movie for the ear. And it makes sense that if you're using now another sense, in this case, speaking, it makes sense that you are now going to hear words and phrases and sentences in a way that may not have been as obvious as you were writing them. If you look back in the history of literature, it really starts with the oral tradition, right? Stories were carried down from generation to generation because they were spoken. Well, once those spoken words were now committed to writing, some things I think at times got lost in the translation. Whereas an A-list author knows instinctively how to take her text and write it in a way that completely fills out that experience, both oral and nonverbal. So yeah, it's inevitable that you're going to discover that, oh, well, what I meant was. The question then becomes, well, do you want to discover that during the recording session, or do you want to discover that when you are rehearsing at home, so that by the time you are ready to start your first session with a producer and or director and engineer, and sometimes the producer and the engineer are one and the same, have you already gone ahead and made those changes and brought them to studio so that you're not making those changes during the session.
Right.
And there's a really good reason for that. One, it saves money because the clock is ticking, right? And it's not unusual for people like myself to say, well, if we're going to be rewriting it, we're going to start charging it. But more importantly, it allows you to not break with your flow. It allows you, it prevents you from, it allows you to deliver that chapter, deliver that scene, deliver that paragraph uninterrupted. There's going to be inevitably, there's going to be mistakes. We call them pickups. All the professionals do it. And oftentimes if we make a mistake in the narrative or we mispronounce a word or our cadence was wrong, we'll stop and say pick up, and then we'll go right to the top of the sentence and do it again. One of the reasons, there's a technical reason for doing that, because in post-production, the engineer will see that the word pickup creates a very specific signature, a waveform signature. And it just makes it a little easier to rush right to that correction, delete what was wrong and drop it back in. I don't use that approach myself because I find that if I make a mistake, I just go ahead and repeat the line, or I repeat it again and again and again until I get it right. And I just know, while I'm in the post-production process, I know that this stretch of very similar waveforms are going to be replacements that I need to consider. And if there's 2 or 3 of those, and I know that I probably want the third one because those first 2 were mistakes. But I think it's important that you know your material, that you want to be as fluent with your understanding of your material as possible before you go into session, because it's just going to make it so much more easier on you. That's my thinking on it.
Well, and as a developmental editor as well, I'm sure you can attest to this. There's something that I was reluctant to do. I had natural resistance of wanting to read my work out loud. So kind of we're talking about creativity. We're talking about authors primarily who want to turn their books into audiobooks at some point or are considering that. So on the front end, on the production side and the creativity, not the production side, the creativity side, it's recommended by many people that you actually read your own work out loud before you even send it out to an editor, because that's going to reveal the things that Ralph's talking about right here. And I found that out the hard way, where there were some sentences that were just way too long and run on, and it cost me more money to have to change that on the fly in studio session time. Had I been prepared, these are tips that we're giving you. And Ralph and I had this conversation in the middle of production too, that we would come back full circle to this for the mere fact that my own learning, everything that I do in life is about learning, and it is for every human being on the face of the earth. And if we're not learning from our mistakes, then we're not growing. And concurrently, if we're unwilling to take a chance on ourselves, ergo the reason for this podcast that we designed and discovered and came up with the name while we were in studio session recording the audiobook at 10 Seconds of Boldness, then we are resistant to, we're succumbing to our own internal fears and anxieties and not willing to take a chance on ourselves. Ergo, we're afraid of failing. And folks, Ralph will attest to this as well. There's a word pickup there that he just talked about. Failure is part of success. And the quicker people get that into their minds, that it's okay to make mistakes. In fact, it's encouraged to make mistakes, minimize them, streamline them, do them quicker and better and faster, so you increase that learning curve. But mistakes are part of life, and you should strive to make more of them quicker because you learn that much faster, right, Ralph?
Oh, definitely. I think we have a bit of an advantage in the audiobook world when it comes to mistakes, because we can always fix it in post, and you don't always get that chance in real life.
Exactly. You can't take, in real life, you got to put your foot in your own mouth. You can't undo that, right? In post,
right. And we frequently, as narrators, we frequently will make mistakes that sounds like we put our foot in our mouth. And actually, Kendra will tell you that there's a technique you can use when you're stumbling on a phrase. She'll take 2 fingers, she'll put them in her mouth and say the same words over and over again. And then she'll remove the fingers, and I don't understand the phenomenon, but suddenly the line sounds perfect. That said, I think that the art of making mistakes is in fact an art. Now, what do I mean by that? You're talking about rebounding. You're talking about what you learn from mistakes. Well, that's true as well in audiobooks. We are frequently learning. It's not unusual for us to go back, 4 or 5 years saying, oh, if I had only known then what I know now, right? It is a cumulative process in terms of, it's like any of the arts. If you're going to be a prima ballerina, you're going to put in a lot of time, and you're going to get really sore at times, and your toes are going to bleed. at the same time, audio is somewhat forgiving.
Yeah.
In that we can repair a certain amount in post that we don't get to do in real life, that you don't get to do in real theater. If you screw up on stage, or if you're in a live radio program, like in the 1930s, 1940s, and even today, now that they're on a research, which I'm happy to see, you make it work. If you screw up, you make it work. If you're on stage and you screw up, you somehow work that in. Well, in audiobooks, we have a little bit of a luxury, and that's we can fix it. Sometimes a mistake is actually to your advantage, and sometimes, on rare occasions, sometimes we'll leave them in. I always advise authors who are considering doing audiobooks or are about to sit down and do the latest draft on their manuscript to read it out loud, dialogue and narrative, because that's how poetry works. Poetry is meant to be spoken. And I think a lot of people, when they're sitting in a library, for example, and they don't want to make noise, and they're looking at Wordsworth or Frost or Kelly and Sheets, as we should say, Shelley and Keats, when they're reading these, they're reading it quietly. But really, if you think about it, the beautiful element of poetry, or one of the beautiful elements, is that these words were specifically crafted and put together by that poet to play to the ear. Mm-hmm. And you read Two Roads Diversion, a Wood and I. If you read that to yourself, okay, it has some impact. But you read it out loud, you're allowed to now take the words to a level that I think Frost intended when he says, and that has made all the difference. So that's hard to convey simply by reading.
Well, yeah, and the other element here, you've got the written word, you've got the spoken word, but to kind of put this into a more holistic framework, you have the action part. And that poem, two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and I be one traveler long I stood and looked down one, blah blah blah. If you take it to the next level and you actually recite that poem out loud while you are walking in West Marin along the Point Reyes National Seashore, and there happens to be a fork in the road, it adds an entirely different level of meaning and understanding. Sure. And it'll change regardless. It'll change wherever that fork in the road happens to be. So just
no question about it. I used that poem. In fact, I use it to this day, one line from it. My apologies to Mr. Frost, but I use that on my Facebook page as my phrase. Only mine reads, two roads diverged in a wood and I took the one less traveled by, and I got horribly lost. And I think that somewhat captures my life story at times.
And we've got iPhones. If you got cell service, you can find your way back to the road you were on and pick a different path later.
Well, that requires something that I'm not very good at, even though I work in audio engineering, and that's handheld devices. I mean, forget it, man. I feel like my 12-year-old would probably get recruited by Starfleet before I ever would. I'll leave it at that.
So let's switch over and just tell the listeners why audiobooks. And this is a chance for you to just do your pitch like you would at the San Francisco Writers Conference, the Sonoma County Writers Conference, which I'm going to throw a free plug in there now because I'm going to release this episode shortly. That will be coming up in October 19th of 2024 in Sonoma County, and the one in San Francisco, I think, is coming up the first week of February, which is not that far away. So why audiobooks? Right.
Well, I think a number of reasons, but I think chief among them, the audiobook has the ability to, especially when a sample travels around the internet via an up to 5-minute sample on Audible, or using what we call a headliner ad, where we take 1 to 4 minutes of the book, or sometimes different scenes, and edit them together, and that's released as a mini movie. It's static, but you see the waveform moving as the narrator speaks, and there's a book cover with it. That can be sent out Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. I think the audiobook has the advantage of actually selling the book. That includes the print book, that includes the ebook, because now the characters and or the narrator playing those characters, or the narrator being a narrator in the case of nonfiction, allows the listener to have a more intimate experience with the text. If you're only sending out passages written on the internet. While that may have an impact, because if it's really well written, those words are going to grab somebody, and probably a lot of somebody's. Now suddenly you're taking it to a level where, I'm not saying a greater level, but I'm saying you're adding the nuance of voice.
Mm-hmm.
And now that makes these words that much more alive for a prospective purchaser of your work. We do something with Squeaky Cheese Productions where we actually record a scene from a novel, even if the novel doesn't have an audiobook yet. And we provide this service to writers who then put it out there on the internet. In fact, we've had some really bizarre experiences and exciting ones in which we won't even tell people on Twitter. We'll find an author's work that may have just dropped or is about to, and we'll read it. And if we like it, without even mentioning it to the author, we'll take it to studio. We'll record that with 1, 2, sometimes upwards of 25 actors, especially in the case of a sci-fi scene or science fantasy. And we'll send it to the author. We'll mix it, edit it, mix it. Sometimes we'll add sound effects like radio theater, and we'll send it to the author as a link to our Dropbox. The author at some point gets back to us, and I'd say most of the time is totally blown away.
Mm-hmm.
To the point where now that author now wants to share that with his or her friends. We had a situation like that not too long ago in which an author did just that. He was an author, if I recall, he was out of Alabama, and he had written a sci-fi. I can't remember the name of it right now, to be honest, but we liked what we read. So we took it to studio, we recorded a scene, we sent it to the author, and we didn't hear from the author for 10 days. We sent it via Twitter. We're like, okay, he must have hated it. Suddenly on the 11th day, we fire up Twitter, we sign into our account, and he has shared it with his friends saying, oh my God, look what's these people at Squeaky Cheese Productions, I've never heard of them before, but look what they did with my scene. When we reverse engineered over the next week, how many people had access to this link? And we looked at his friends who were repeating it, retweeting it. And most of them had more than 10,000 followers themselves. We did the math. More than 500,000 people had heard that audio. Wow. So, the power of social media, and this was a freebie on us. I mean, that sold us on the idea of social media, but it's also harkened back to an ancient idea of sowing to reap, right? We gave it away. Now we don't always give it away. Now we charge for that phenomenon, but we've done it time and time again. And as I sit here right now, there is a project that was co-authored called Here Comes Grim, or Now Comes Grim. No, Here Comes Grim. It is a sci-fi. It's a military-based sci-fi. And we took a scene. We cleared it with the author in this case. We didn't surprise the authors. We cleared it. They provided us a scene that, we left it up to them. We said, well, we've read some of your material, but if there's a particular scene you'd like us to record, well, they provided that. And I think we had something like 8 or 9 actors perform this scene where these guys are going across a front trying to shoot their bullets at this strange bubble and the bullets are bouncing off. And there were a couple other scenes along the way, but we added sound effects. We treated it like a radio theater project or an audio theater project. These guys loved it. That was about 3 months ago. Every day for the past 3 months, they have been repurposing that. Now they've added a video to it using our soundtrack. And they've been repurposing to hundreds of thousands of prospective buyers a day. And we're thinking, and we can't say thank you enough to these guys, right? So toward your question, why audiobooks? Well, that's one reason, is that it does present an audio selling card for your book. That's one reason. The other reason is that we are finding, and the pundits are finding that, or the literary influencers are finding that audiobooks are actually driving the sales of traditional print books and ebooks. Who knew? It's an idea that harkens back to Universal Studios Florida, back in the 1990s, when they pushed the idea that you see the movie, you ride the movie, and now you buy the movie. So you see the movie, you now go to the theme park and you experience the movie in an event where you can jump into a roller coaster type setting. Oh, but then you can buy the movie. At that time, it was CD or video game. So I think audiobooks, it's not surprising that audiobooks are driving print sales, because how many times have you seen a picture that you've absolutely loved And then the next time you're in a bookstore, you say, I want to own the book. So now I can have a more personal experience. And that personal experience, by the way, allows you to do something. And the data supports this. The science supports this. That personal experience of listening to a book allows you to be far more engaged than simply watching it alone. We now know, using various PET scan studies, that the parts of the brain that light up when you're listening to a Mozart concerto are very similar to the parts of the brain that light up when you're listening to an audiobook, but not the same when you're watching a movie. It's almost like your brain is on fire. And that doesn't surprise me at all as a producer and narrator of audiobooks, because you are bringing something to the party that watching a TV show or streaming Netflix or watching a motion picture, and I'm not knocking those media. I used to work in motion pictures. But you are bringing something as a listener to the party that we knew about back in the 1930s, when our great-grandparents were sitting around the 1930s Philco cabinet radio with the family, listening to a spaghetti Western or a film noir done as a radio noir. So it's not, it shouldn't come as any surprise to anybody listening to us today that, or tonight as the case may be, that it is a far more engaging experience to have an audiobook versus a film. Now, I'm not suggesting that audiobooks are far more engaging than reading a book, but I think there's some evidence that suggests that it is a little bit more engaging.
And that makes sense too, Ralph, because there's an element of bringing in, it's a collaborative effort. All artistry is collaboration, all business is collaboration. And when you invite the reader or listener or audience into that world, there's a certain element that it's show don't tell. You want them to be able to visualize themselves in those scenarios. And when you have that opportunity for engagement, I agree, it's incredibly heightened with audiobooks, because you also have the ability for the vocal intonation and this pace, and you can hear the emotional pull. And emotion is what really is the key that captures audiences and wants to continue reading, continue listening, continue watching a movie. It's that roller coaster, that narrative arc that probably far better than I do, being a developmental editor for so long. But it's a trip to see how much more powerful it is. I mean, the description you had about lighting up the different PET scans in the brain waves for an audiobook, I get it.
Sure. I think there's one of the, if the audience, your listening audience, wants to try an experiment. It's not a new idea, by the way. This dates back to the 1970s. I think it was New Yorker magazine. The author of this very short article took two words, Donald Duck, and wrote them 20 different ways. So for example, there's Donald Duck, there's Donald Duck, and then there was 19 other or 18 other ways to say those two words. Well, try that sometime. Sit in front of a microphone. It doesn't have to be a $5,000 Newman or a $500 Bluebird Blue like the ones we use. But try recording sometime two words, Donald Duck, and see how many different intonations you can do with the same words. And that really is the beautiful thing about audiobook narration, is that ultimately we have to interpret the author's words. The author isn't director. In fact, our contracts will say, once we get the book, once we have provided you examples, if your book is fiction, we will provide the author opportunities for 2 or 3 different character interpretations of every character in the book, and have the author sign off on one of those. And if we haven't hit it, then we go back in until we do, to try to approximate as closely as possible the author's vision for that character, the accent, the age, the relationships to other characters. What does the character stand to lose? And I think that once that happens, once we have signed off with the author on that spreadsheet that says character A, B, C, D, E, description of the character, oh, here's the audio clips that we're recommending, and oh, here's the one we're going to do. Once that's done, there is still a great deal of interpretation that is left up to the narrator or narrators to bring those characters to life. And let me tell you, let me assure you that is a daunting responsibility, to take somebody else's baby and mature it for the ears. We didn't write the material, but we have to do right by the material, but we also have to bring something to the party that the author might not have, because the author is an author. The author is writing the story. We are performing the story. And that comes with a whole set of parameters and conditions and nuances and experience that hopefully, if we're doing our jobs well, bring those characters to life in a very convincing way, and in a way that the author intended.
So that let's use that as a transition. We've got basically there's two things on why audiobooks. You've got it's selling, audiobooks are selling, it's a selling card. It's also driving sales for both the print and the ebook. And then we already talked briefly about the, the emotional component or the engagement aspect. And I'm going to add a fourth one in there because you alluded to it directly, is increase of reach, the scalability of having these done when you take the audio book and break it down into a segment that's a movie trailer or an audio trailer. Let's switch gears though. Talk about professionals versus audiobook being narrated by the actual author or authors, and what are some of the things, the advantages and disadvantages. I guess that's the easiest way to set this up, because there's benefits to both, but what are some of the advantages and disadvantages and the pitfalls and or shortcomings of one or the other?
All right, it's a terrific question, and it's one that we frequently encounter, especially in the nonfiction space. One of the things we look at is the genre. Is this a memoir? Is this an autobio? Is this a self-help book, a motivational text? All of those genres will almost inevitably lead us as producers of audiobooks to turn to the author and say, if you are willing to try narration, we will coach you through it. We will direct you through it. But we really think you need to narrate it. Because, for example, that self-help book, that motivational text is your brand. And to have somebody else suddenly narrate your brand when you might be at that TED Talk soon, or you might be at, on a multi-city tour delivering your motivational ideas and ideology. Well, to now suddenly have somebody else narrating it, we feel is a little bit disingenuous. Are there, in fact, motivational speakers who do have other people narrating their books? Sure. But for the most part, we'll look at that and we'll say, no, it should be you. Same with autobio and memoir. That's your life story. And while we feel that we would be able to tell that story and tell it in a way that is engaging, and hopefully tell it in a way that brings your words to life, at the same time, it's your story. So we'll first go to the author. And it's not to shoot ourselves in the foot, because we're still being retained to now produce the author as opposed to narrate for the author. It's a separate pay structure, but we will encourage the author to tell his or her own story. Okay, so then there's the next level of discrimination. Can they do it? And not always. You yourself found out that there was a bit of a learning curve, but once you fell into it, man, you were phenomenal. I mean, you were on fire. And I think it probably opened up a whole new parallel career for you, because you've got a beautiful voice to start with. You have a very convincing timbre, and it's very approachable. Well, had you not had those factors going in, we still would have encouraged you to tell your story, because 10 seconds of boldness is your brand. Your ideas on paper now being brought to the ear. So if our job in that moment is to simply ramp you up, to make you familiar with the process, to teach you things about phrasing and breathing and distance to the mic and mic technique, to teach you about pickups and that it's okay to make a mistake and then go to the top of the sentence because we're going to fix it in post. Well, if that's what we have to do, then it makes more sense for you to tell the story. So in that regard, we look at the genre. There are times when we are recording on behalf of an author who is just absolutely against going to the booth. We did that recently with a wonderful book. We have co-authors on the third installment in a series called Oh My God, That's Me. And we recently, in the last 3 months, we recently recorded Oh My God, That's Me, in which one of the authors up in Portland agreed to do her parts of this book, but the co-author wanted me to record his parts of the book. And in this particular case, the text focused on, it's absolutely a touching story. The text focused on a group of individuals who are battling bipolar disorder and schizophrenia, but whose lives have radically turned around because of a program, which I believe is out of the Pacific Northwest, called Stand Up for Mental Health. They are given the chance to study privately with their class and then go on stage publicly and perform stand-up. And to watch these individuals first tell their story before they get on stage, because that's what we're doing in the narrative for each chapter. Each chapter is a unique individual. Molly, the doctor, who had to drop out of medicine because sometime around the age of 30, she was diagnosed with bipolar. She wanted to continue practicing medicine, but couldn't. Well, now suddenly Molly, who is devastated by this news, discovers that she has a whole new life in stand-up. And I got to tell you, she's funny as hell. To see this woman get up there on stage, it brings tears to your eyes. To see Lorraine, who's in her late 70s or 80s, a woman who suffered just incalculable, horrible events at an early age, including rape, just a whole series of abuses that happened to her along the way. Here she is up on stage now that she's told the horrific events in her life story. But here she's up on stage, almost like Estelle Getty, bringing the audience to tears with laughter. That's phenomenal. But there's a case where the co-author, Dave Mowry, said, you know what, I'd rather you guys tell the story for me. And we had to play the male, we had to play a number of the male characters. But we also did something unique in the annals of audiobooks or traditional audiobooks. We asked both authors, Tara Ralstad, who narrated her own parts of the book. And by the way, she doesn't have an axis 1 through 4, the axis 1 through 5 psychiatric disorder, but she has children who have suffered and overcome these disorders. So she had a unique voice as well. But we asked both authors, Tara and Dave, do you have the videos from these stage performances? And they said, well, as a matter of fact, we do. We said, okay, can we listen to them? Can we watch them? And if we like what we see, do you mind if we strip out the audio and embed that and mix that into the narrative? And they said, go for it. Let's see what happens. Well, it was amazing what happened. We included the live laughter. We included excerpts throughout each chapter. We keep going back to the stage performance and then go back to the narrative that was done in studio. And it's this wonderful confluence of these two audio sources, the live audio of us recording the narrative, telling the story for each character, but also their performance on stage. And it's just beautiful. And when the book drops, which I believe it'll drop sometime in March, I would run out and grab a copy because it will, in fact, it's very inspiring stories. It doesn't matter if you know anyone with a axis 1 through 4 disorder in the DSM-5. What you learn from this in terms of overcoming, what you learn from this in terms of the strength of the human spirit, when set free, but sometimes when coached to recognize that you're not going to be locked into this phenomenon called a psychiatric disorder, that doesn't spell out your whole life. To hear this is an absolutely, I get teary-eyed just thinking about the project. So yeah, there are times when we have to, or we are asked to by the author to sub in for the author. Okay. And we take that very seriously.
No, on the fiction side, though, you correct me if I'm wrong, but you actually prefer to be the narrator for fiction in most cases because there's so many different voices and characters, and you have that breadth and depth. And let's talk a little bit about that, if that's correct or if it's not.
Sure.
And some of the challenges, because you shared with me when I was in studio a different project you were working on, or one that was coming up, where quite literally you had almost, between you and Kendra, you had, I think, 15 or 20 different characters in a very difficult and challenging sci-fi fantasy where you have words and phrases and language that you need to learn. So talk briefly about that, and then we're going to wrap with kind of pulling this all together in the next 10 minutes or so.
Okay, well, first off, the project I believe you're referring to is The Heir of the First Tower. Mm-hmm. really cool book, a fantasy book involving not 20 or 30, but 50 bird people. These are people with wings, and they have human faces and human anatomy, but they have wings. And the author chose to take these 50 characters and break them up into 4 clans, 4 warring clans. And the clans are warring over a resource, not unusual in warfare, in the history of warfare. But in this case, they are warring over a particular substance that comes from a particular field that will cure a disease called white claw, which is causing the wings of these various bird people to decay, and therefore they lose the ability to fly. Well, to distinguish each of the clans, the author asked us to do one clan with a French accent, members of another clan with a Mandarin accent, members of another clan with a British accent, and members of the 4th clan with a Spanish accent.
Oh,
well,
my
okay,
goodness.
that's interesting, except how hard can that be, right? Until you discover that when you do your research on YouTube and other sources, you discover that, well, in Spain alone, between Andalusia and there's more than like 14 different accents. So we had to go back to the author and say, well, do you want us to sound like we're from Cadiz, Spain, or are we from Barcelona, or? And we had to, there was a lot of give and take there where we had to work with the author and the author had to work with us to figure out, what's the best way to go here. So there's a case where it's imperative that your narrators know, to the extent that they can learn it, know the accents, because the accents are going to actually influence the characterization. And, we have in our business a phrase, and this goes back decades. I heard this from a voice coach when I was doing commercial voiceovers back in the late 80s. Kat Lehman, she said, acting choices, then choose voices. And what she meant was, you don't go up to the mic and assume a voice. You go up to the mic knowing the character, and the voice will come. Because the voice is influenced by who that character is, and everything that goes into who that character is. So I would say that it really helps to have professional narrators bring your characters to life. We love doing it. And we are frequently surprised to discover, and it's the beautiful thing about audiobook narration, is that there's always a new character coming along any day now, right? Every project has a new character. So to be able to now go in there, you can't do that character. Okay, maybe that character is a psycho killer from Houston. Well, just because we had another character from Houston in another project who's about the same age doesn't mean those two should sound the same. Mm-hmm. So I would say that research is imperative. We spend a lot of time on YouTube, and this also applies to the nonfiction space when we are doing characters or individuals, real people who appear in different chapters of, let's say, a book like we did a digital health book called The Digital Health Revolution by Kevin Perot. Well, Kevin had access to major names in big pharma, in insurance, in telehealth, and every one of his chapters is dominated by one of these luminaries from that industry, all talking about the influence of the smartphone and how the time is coming very soon. In fact, it's here, when you will be getting most of your medical treatment, to the extent that it can be done outside of the surgery bay, over a smartphone. You'll be walking into a CVS and they already know what you need, not just based on the prescription, but because the doctors have been speaking with the pharmacy and the pharmacy has been speaking with the retail, and they're starting to now give you a whole enhanced experience to treat your particular ailment and to have a better quality of life. Well, we had to play every one of those pharmaceutical executives. So the best way to do that was to go on YouTube. And if we couldn't find them on YouTube, we would go to their corporate websites. If we still could not find them, and if we still couldn't learn their mannerisms and their accents, then we based it on, ultimately, it comes down to, if it ain't on the page, it ain't on the stage. We went back to the narrative. Well, if this individual grew up, he was born in Israel, but he was raised in the Bronx, he's going to have influences in his accent that must come out if we're going to be true to who that character is. And there are many schools of thought on this. There are some narrators who will say, well, you shouldn't have to go into that level of detail as long as you make a convincing presentation. And we'd like to think otherwise. We like to think that, well, no, if we have time to do our homework, and we always have time to do the homework in the pre-production stage, then we should be able to hit that mic really, really, really giving you a very close approximation to who that individual is.
That's awesome. And I can imagine that trying to keep it straight when you're recording it, do you record all the Mandarin clans at once so that you can stay true to that voice versus the Spain ones, etc. It might kind of overlap with the other book that you were talking about, the multiple disorders, because I could see how it'd be real easy to lose your focus on all of this, right?
Well, this is why they say that it has been said, and no disrespect, that this would be the perfect profession for somebody who battles multi personality disorder, right? Because then you could get paid for it. But in all due
Exactly.
respect, I would say that toward your question, we keep on the side of our tablets, we keep little audio samples of who the character is, how the character sounds. We have to, and sometimes we have to revisit that because you may not be doing, it would be unusual for you to do the whole book in one day, right? That's impossible.
Right.
So you're doing it over time, and that character may not appear. If that character appears in chapter 2, that character may not appear again until chapter 33. So it's imperative that we already have a decision list of sound bites that we tap so that we can remind ourselves, oh, okay, this is the character.
That's helpful. I mean, I learned some of that. My wife does it. I don't do it that frequently because I write mostly nonfiction. So it's pretty much one voice unless I'm including interviews from other folks. But she has a full-blown character. Part of her outlining process is a full-blown character bio.
Yep.
One of the books she wrote, she actually found celebrity lookalikes because she wanted to have that visual representation of what these characters look like and their mannerisms. So even at the author level, some of that pre-writing research is done when you're trying to create these worlds and or scene settings and storyline that is believable. Because at the end of the day, it really
Definitely.
comes down to being believable, right?
It comes down to being believable, and it's also a technique that we'll use and we'll encourage authors who are narrating their works to use in the booth, where we'll say, look, if you really want to knock this one out of the park and you want to make this an intimate story so that the listener feels that you are speaking to him or her and only him or her, well, take a photograph with you into the booth and place it on the back wall right behind the microphone so that you're always able to look at that photograph as if you're sitting across a table from someone. It's a tried and true technique. It's very effective. And we encourage that because there's a phenomenon that you and your audience is familiar with, that they encounter every day they jump into an automobile and turn on morning drive radio. There may be hundreds of thousands, if not millions, especially syndicated radio. There may be millions of listeners to that radio talk show. But you'd swear that the host is speaking to you, or that the host and his or her guests are having an intimate conversation that you're listening in on. You forget in that moment, in your automobile, which some could argue is a form of a sort of a moving recording booth or theater. You forget that, oh, wait a minute, there are millions of other people listening to this syndicated radio broadcast. That's an art form, to be able to convey that instinctively and automatically, to be able to speak in a way that lets you in on the conversation as opposed to standing in front of millions of people at a lectern and broadcasting. So we employ that in our own line of work. We have to have an intimate experience with the character. We have to have an intimate experience with the listener. And if we're really caught up in the moment, if we're really caught up in the character or characters, we've already forgotten the outside world. And that should be conveyed across the microphone, and will be.
So as we wrap, let's take these two different topics that we've talked about and then mash it all together from a personal experience standpoint. What is it that drives you and it adds value to your own life that makes this so rewarding and fulfilling?
Well, I think it's always great to start with a really cool story. It's always wonderful. It's always challenging to be able to take somebody's prose and bring it to life. And if it's really, really good prose, wow, that's just huge. It's not unusual on the nonfiction space you become kind of a a master of all things in the sense that, if we're doing a finance book or how to invest, or we're doing a real estate book, or we're doing a digital health book, it's kind of neat to have that sort of like a Cornell education in the course of a few months, because we're being exposed to other people's ideas. And frequently those ideas are new ideas. Now, that doesn't mean I'm going to run out tomorrow and become a real estate investor, but at least now I am somewhat fluent I feel like it is contributing to and I believe I'm also speaking for Kendra, it is contributing to our sense of the world to be able to know this material. And you become intimate with the material if you're recording it. The ideas get embedded. I would say that in terms of my personal experience beyond that, on the fiction side, it really is a neat feeling to be able to take somebody else's text and bring a character to life and know that you're the only person on planet Earth who brought that character to life in such a unique way. Take 20 different narrators and they're going to do 20 different takes on who that character is. But there'll be some crossover because the character has certain parameters. She is 25. She is a detective. She lives in Cincinnati with her pet cat named Leonard. Okay, well, those are some of the setups. But every narrator will do that. C.K. Monterey, in this case it was Kendra, but every narrator, professional narrator, will do that character C.K. Monterey in a unique way that brings part of them to the picture. So I guess for me, Sean, it's a daunting responsibility, as I've said, but there is an intrinsic payoff that goes well beyond the paycheck in bringing a non-existent character and words that are two-dimensional to a three-dimensional life. I'm not suggesting we're playing gods, but it's just the best thing I can say is try it sometime. It's the coolest thing on earth. But it's also as terrifying as cordless bungee jumping at sometimes, because we're like, did I bomb that? Did I completely butcher that? I mean, it happened. Fortunately, there's post.
Oh, and this has been a delight, Ralph. I just, we learn. You guys were incredibly patient with me, and I had to be incredibly patient with you when we're in studio. And I think as we wrap here, what advice would you give? Well, two things. One, we want to let people know how they can find out about you. I know you've got some promotions of the audio trailers that you had talked about. I don't know what that cutoff is, but it's something that is very valuable and interesting. I think it's great, but how do people find out about you? And what are the few last words that you would give to aspiring potential clients or authors who are on the fence right now about wanting to have their audiobook produced, whether it's fiction or nonfiction?
Well, let me answer the second question first, and that's listen to audiobooks. Go into the genre in which you write and listen to what your peers are doing in the way of audiobooks. And then ask yourself, well, how come they've got an audiobook and I don't? What was it that motivated them to do it? So, I would say that that in itself is motivation to go out and either have an audition narrator or narrators to record your book, or do it yourself. If you've never done an audiobook before, I would discourage you from doing it yourself until you've consulted with an audiobook producer or narrator to find out what goes into it, because you're going to need the right equipment. You're going to need an acoustically significant space. Sometimes that is a coat closet, and sometimes a coat closet will deliver a level of audio that is on par with a professional grade studio. But it's something you really want to do a little bit of homework in. Narrators tend to be in an art form where they are very willing to provide advice. I can't speak for all art forms, but I'd say of the ones that really, really enjoy giving advice, narrators are certainly in the top 5%. Part of that is because we live such a monastic lifestyle that we love to talk to real people. In terms of how to reach us, your audience simply needs to visit www.squeakycheeseproductions, that's SQUEAKY, cheese, like fromage, squeakycheeseproductions.com. In terms of an opportunity, because they are listening to your podcast right now, we will give 10% off, provided we sign off on the material, because we have to see 5 pages from your manuscript before we will agree to take on the project. And there's also the consideration of our production calendar. But we'll give a flat 10% off of the production budget for anyone who comes to us and says, well, I first heard about you guys on Sean's podcast. That's provided, again, that we have signed off on the project. We do turn away projects all the time. We turn away far more projects than we sign.
This has been,
Does that help?
oh, it totally helps. And I think you and for the other authors who haven't yet registered or aren't planning on attending the 3-day conference coming up in February, what are the dates of that again? I know you and or
The
Kendra.
San Francisco Writers Conference. It's I have to look it up, but they can go to SFWC, San Francisco Writers Conference, sfwc.org, and it's in mid-February. I don't want to misquote the dates, but it's always in mid-February, except during the COVID when they had to shut down for a year. But it's held at the Hyatt Embarcadero.
Mhm.
I think it's the crown jewel of West Coast writers conferences. We've made phenomenal friends there, gotten incredible advice. You actually get a chance to rub shoulders in the hallways and after the seminars with some of the luminary greats in literature, in literary agencies from New York and Chicago and then San Francisco. And it's just a phenomenal experience. It's not inexpensive, but it's definitely worth it. And of course, it's in San Francisco, so you're at a beautiful setting. But San Francisco Writers Conference coming up mid-February, and to check the dates, sfwc.org. There are, of course, other writers' conferences throughout the country and across the world. The biggest one, I think, is in Germany. It's a book reseller conference. But you definitely want to do conferences. I don't get anything from this, although I will say that this year we are doing 2 seminars at the SFWC on nonfiction books, in which we're going to have hopefully yourself as one of our panelists, and hopefully Dave Mallory and Tara Ralstad as some of our panelists. But writers' conferences are a wonderful opportunity to do 2 things. 1, of course, network, but 2, commiserate, to recognize that there's a lot of other people out there just like yourself who are real people who are now coming out from their writing hovels to share with you their unique experience. And I guarantee that if you reach out during those conferences to the person sitting next to you, you're going to learn something about writing that you didn't know before. It's inevitable. And that's why we do it. And we love doing it. And we love sharing with the writing audience our experience in audiobooks.
And that's exactly why I'm doing this show. I mean, we kind of knocked around the idea of what to come up with the name. Yes, there's a show that was out there that's called Dare to Be Great, but that's the end of it. And it hasn't been in production since 2021. And I ran a risk there. But this has been Dare to Be Great, Dare to Be You. And what Ralph just alluded to at the very end there is talking about association and the power of association and networking. And that is specifically why I have this show in this format, because I want to expose as many people as are willing to listen to different insights that you may not necessarily have an opportunity to hear. And this right now is free. So when it's out there, if you want to hear a nice, great hour and 15-minute conversation with a professional audiobook producer and engineer, listen to this show. I'm going to be publishing shows pretty much every week until I hit 52, and then I'll decide if I want to continue doing it. So, Ralph, thank you. Thank you so much for not only your time, but your wisdom, your expertise, and yours and Kendra's willingness to coach me through this process. You brought that out in this show. Folks, if you want to learn more about me, you can find me at www.seanlangwell.com. I've got a lot of different things going on. I've written 4 books. They're all available on Amazon or wherever books are sold. The most recent one is called Today's the Day, which is basically a distillation of 10 Seconds of Boldness as a book to encourage and inspire you to harness this gift that we have inside each and every one of us. And it's a gift of love, and it's a gift of gratitude. And we have a tendency to forget that everything that we're looking for out there is already inside us. So if you like what you heard today, share it, pass it on to friends. This has been Dare to Be Great, Dare to Be You. I'm your host, Sean Langwell, and thank you again, Ralph Scott with Squeaky Cheese.
Thank you. Thank you, Sean. I really enjoyed this. And then real quick, when's your next narrated book?
I'm working on one, and I'm deciding if to your point, I'm deciding if I want to have this done with narration in mind before I finish writing it. So that's what I'm doing, because everything you talked about here sunk in here, and now it's part of my own creative process. Is this going to be planned as an audiobook as well? Not everyone will, but absolutely. Thank you again.
Thank you.